A magnificent, a brave act of defiance for Charlie Hebdo to repeat exactly what got their colleagues killed only a week before.
Well, obviously, people were offended by the first cover, but I don't think that the second cover was printed specifically to offend people again. You know, I think it's more about the values of tolerance over violence.
And didn't they have to send a signal to the terrorists that they wouldn't be cowed?
Well, I mean, it's a very simplistic way to look at things, frankly. I think this idea that you can take revenge on terrorists by reoffending, as it were, and, you know, deeply,
They're not taking revenge. They're just saying, even though we lost all our colleagues in this barbarous act, we're not going to be cowed by you. We're going to carry on doing what we do.
But surely the best way to move from such horror is not to fall into more, you know, inciting violence and offending people, but to move towards reconciliation.
In what way does that cover incite violence?
Well, in many ways, I mean, the very definition of incitement to racial hatred is when you cause harm or offence to a person or group of people, and which leads to violence.
It's a cartoon of someone who's meant to be Mohammed. It's a rather endearing little cartoon. He's got a tear coming out of his eye. He says, "You're forgiven," and "Je suis Charlie." In what way is that racist or offensive?
I mean, with all due respect, Andrew, it's not for a white, middle-class, entitled, comfortable man like you sitting in, you know, the cosy environs of the BBC.
Just answer the question.
Answer
the question instead of being offensive.
What is offensive to those communities or not?
So you can be offensive, but they can't be.
No. What I'm saying is you have to look at it from the receiving end, people who are on the other end.
So I'm asking you, in what way is it offensive?
It is offensive because they see it as an insult to one of the most revered figures in their faith.
Do you see it as offensive?
These are people who hold to something
I know a lot of people that are not offended by this cartoon. Obviously, we won't hear from those people, but, you know, it's fashionable to be offended. Some people are offended on other people's behalf.
There are people in this country going around trying to be offended.
I mean, they're trying really hard. Some people are offended on my behalf, and I'm thinking, hang on, I don't feel the offence. How can you feel it for me?
But isn't Nabila more representative of Muslims in this country than you, and there are a lot of them? In fact, the polls suggest a substantial number just don't think there should be any kind of visual depiction of the Prophet at all.
Well, I think that actually the way he's been depicted in the second copy of the magazine is actually quite enlightened and forgiving and kind, which is what the Prophet was.
No, I think there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant, just as there's no such thing as being a little bit blasphemous. And you have to look at it again from the perspective of young, disenfranchised young Muslims who hold, you know, a very sacred, who hold their faith, you know, very sacred, and you have to see that from their perspective.
What evidence do you have that they're offended?
Because people have said so.
Who?
French people, I know, from the banlieue, people growing in disenfranchised young people in France.
When did you last speak to people in the banlieue?
I come from the banlieue.
No, but when did you last speak to them the past couple of days?
I speak to them every day. I'm a reporter.
You spoke to them today?
Yes, absolutely. But that's very evident. People are very offended by that.
Right. Where are you on this?
I'm outraged. No, I'm outraged by Nabila. I really am. 12 people are murdered. And the magazine, the people who have worked with those murdered people produce a magazine the following week, I think, of extraordinary magnanimity. I mean, to have all is forgiven, to have the Prophet saying, "Je suis Charlie," to imagine that, you know, not only have 12 people been murdered in Paris, but 130 school kids have been massacred in Pakistan, 200 school kids have been seized in northern Nigeria, all in the name of the Prophet, which I imagine, I love to believe the Prophet would be deeply offended by. For these people to produce a magazine that says all is forgiven, I think is such a wonderful act of magnanimity. And for people now to go around saying that this is offensive, seems to me to be, in a way, trying to open up a second front.
But
I mean, we are all appalled at that these people were murdered in Paris.
And so I am.
And I think
so
really,
overwhelming.
And I think really, what would be very suitable would be a period of silence.
What,
not for people to go around.
More suitable than reproducing a cartoon, for
not
example.
for people to go around saying they're offended. For people either to be silent or to continue to talk about the horror of people being murdered in the name of the Prophet.
The level of atrocity.
Why don't you go along and say it and keep saying it?
Michael.
Okay, I'll come back. Let me hear what Diane's going to say.
I understand Nabila's point of view, but I would just say two things. One is, there hasn't always been an absolute prohibition of visual representations of the Prophet. I mean, hundreds of years ago.
Persians reproduced the visual
but my
representation
main
of the
thing
Prophet.
is this. I understand what you're saying, but nonetheless, those guys came in and slaughtered 12 people in cold blood, and I don't think that Charlie Hebdo could have done anything other than come out this week with a representation like that. Anything else would have been to say that you can terrorise us. Anything
no,
else
absolutely
would have,
not. That's a very simplistic view of things, and I'm absolutely not here to defend, what has happened.
But given what had happened, they had to do that. That's
Do you think there should be other limits when it comes to religion and humour?
I mean, I'm a comedian. We take the mick out of everything.
As Charlie Hebdo did too.
And so it should be, because that's how you understand things, is by being able to laugh at them. Look at the Jews. They've come such a long way. They laugh at themselves. They get other people to laugh with them. And as a result of that, they're very much liked. They're very much endeared. And I think maybe that's what we need to do. To get people to like us, we need to get people to laugh with us.
Try and draw an anti-Semitic cartoon tomorrow, and we'll see how this goes down.
I think if it's got a good gag at the end, the Jews would love it.
And we're journalists, you're politicians, you're a citizen, a satirist, a comedian. We all know that there is no such thing as absolute freedom of speech. It has to come within the boundaries of the law and indeed common sense.
Right,
is it sensible, Andrew, let me put it to you, to publish deeply offensive cartoons of Muslims?
Well, you keep on saying they're offensive, but you can't give. You just don't like the idea of the Prophet being depicted,
I don't like the idea
correct?
of Muslims
That's your
being
real
offended.
objection.
But by definition,
but you have no right. You have
by
no
that.
right not to be offended. In a free society, you have no right not to be offended.
If this
Isn't free speech
No,
part of being offended?
it's my right to offend you, but it's your right to be offended.
No,
as
if
well.
it is going to cause violence, which it did.
No, it does not cause violence.
It did.
That's an outrageous
Not in
thing to
Paris,
say.
but also in the Middle East.
No, that is
a lot of
outrageous.
people died in the Middle East when those cartoons were printed. Are you going to ignore the loss of lives?
Nobody.
Shall we?
Nobody.
Is it not a great reason to move on to a more...
Hold on, let Diane say something.
Ignoring the loss of life, and I probably have more sympathy for your view than some of the other people here, but nonetheless, to say that those cartoons, in some sense, legitimise slaughtering all those people in cold blood, that's going too far. That is what you're saying.
Into my mouth.
No, you said it caused it.
Exactly,
It led
and
to
that's
violence.
wrong.
It led to violence. There's no denying the fact that those radical Islamists felt that their God had been blasphemed against,
hold
and
on.
they set out to murder
Hold on,
them.
you
Is that
say...
why they,
direct
is
connection
that why they
between
shot the two
blasphemy
policemen
and
on the pavement? Is that why they
Why
shot
did
the
they
two
shoot a
policemen on
Muslim
the pavement?
policeman?
I mean, to put it in a very unfashionable way, he was collateral damage, and he was representative of a force of authority. We're
What do you make of what Nabila's saying?
We're learning today that one of the...
I understand what you're saying, but I think those terrorists had a lack of humour. Lack of being able to laugh.
Well, I wondered if they weren't just looking for an excuse, because the fact is there are major jihadist terrorist attacks in Islamic states that don't allow any criticism of Islam at all. So even if you stopped cartoons of Muhammad, they'll find another reason to kill us.
You're not comparing like with like. You're comparing undemocratic, autocratic societies with a very advanced, civilised society like the UK. Let me put it to you, Michael. Would you be comfortable, really, that we regress so much, that we go back to drawing childish cartoons about black people, bigoted ones about homosexuals, and indeed anti-Semitic ones about Jews? Have Britain not got so far enough that we moved on from those racial stereotypes that we used to see on light entertainment
You can see childish cartoons any day of the week in all sorts of magazines and all sorts of places. You really must stop making this link between the cartoons and the slaughter, as if one legitimises the other.
I don't think a cartoon of the Prophet is a racial stereotyping anyway.
But it is for just stereotype for people at the other end.
You need to let someone else speak.
But when in the name of the Prophet, which is exactly what happened in Paris and what is happening all over the world, when in the name of the Prophet people are being slaughtered, you have to allow the Prophet to speak back in the eyes of other people. And that is what these cartoons are doing. They're giving a different...
You have to put that cover in the context of the tradition of Charlie Hebdo, which depicts Muslims in the most wicked and cruel manner, as terrorists, as fanatics.
I thought,
and indeed black people as monkeys. Would you be comfortable to see that in the British press, Diane? Please answer this question.
But that would be that would run itself foul of the anti-race hatred laws.
And so it should be the same for
Yes, but
whipping up
you would
racial
have, I
hatred
would
against
suggest,
communities.
but you would have a hard job saying that Charlie Hebdo cover ran foul of racial hatred laws. Do you think it does? Do you think it does?
There is a direct link between
me
what
ask
Charlie
you.
Hebdo publishes and the perception of Muslims within French society. They are being seen as
Anybody
the
read
alien
Charlie
enemy
Hebdo?
within.
Do you think the Prophet would have condoned these killings?
This is not the issue.
No, please answer. But it is the issue.
This is not a
It is the
theological
issue.
question, Michael.
No,
It is,
This is a
because
very
the cartoon
pragmatic
shows
Tell us.
This
the
is a
cartoon shows
pragmatic
the
one.
Prophet saying "Je suis Charlie."
But
the
Michael,
cartoon shows
you
the
make-
Prophet saying
you-
all is forgiven.
But you're making
Do you
a
think
simple
the Prophet,
link between.
But please answer the question: Would the
I'm answering it.
would the
but
Prophet have
Well,
condoned?
you have to
the
answer it
killings?
quickly because we're
He
running out
would
of
have
time.
been very
It is
forgiving and he would have
often-
risen above it with
is
dignity.
often
That's what he would have done.
This is what a
non-devout
number of Muslims
people
have said.
who
That's
go
what he would
about
have done.
and perpetrate these
All right.
actions.
Would the Prophet have condoned the killings?
We're going to have to leave it there. Not a lot of humour tonight, I'm afraid. But thanks to both of you for being with us.